How's it going, everyone? And welcome in for another edition of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. A lot to get to in this one. We'll talk a bit about, we'll go over, recap some of the key games over the weekend. We'll talk about St. Mary's, Nebraska, LMU St. Louis. We'll get into Washington State, Iowa, number of games that had some pretty big implications on the early part of the non-conference and what we might see moving forward. I'll preview a little bit about Gonzaga, San Diego State, which is Monday night. Lost a little bit of its luster because of some key injuries, but we'll still we'll preview that just a little bit. We'll also go over some highlights, some freshmen that are really kind of starting to stand out. Obviously, with Tyrone Riley, Austin Rapp, Mikey Lewis, part of that group. So we'll talk a little bit about all of them in a little bit as well. Because again, good young stars that are starting to already show early returns in these first couple of weeks. But we're going to start with what to me might be an early red flag in the WCC, and that is what we have seen from Santa Clara over the last week and a half. They have lost 3 straight games after winning their opener against St. Louis. Their opponents are averaging 83 points. Their opponents are shooting nearly 49% from the field, 42% from 3. They've lost to Arizona State, which you can forgive when you look at what's happened. But then they lose to North Dakota State, which is near unforgivable. And then to lose the way they did on Saturday against Nevada, a very good Nevada team, mind you, but to lose 85-59, beat Trail by as much as 34 in that game, there is some major concerns over this Santa Clara team, which was supposed to be a team many thought, myself included, was going to challenge for an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. This was, by many accounts, many people believe this was the year that it might finally happen, that they could return to the NCAA tournament. And 4 games in, it feels like it's already panic time for the Broncos. And, when you look at it, it's like there's probably a lot to panic about. Again, mention some of the opponent shooting numbers, whatnot. They have not defended the 3-point line well. Their 4 games, it's been 12 made 3-pointers, 12, 15, 15, and 9 in the blowout against Nevada. The last 3 games, free throw attempts, 27, 24, 31. Teams are marching to the free throw line. The defense just has not been there for Santa Clara in this early part of the season. And it's not like Santa Clara doesn't know how to score, because we know they do, but they just can't stop anybody right now. And yes, it is very early in the rankings, very early in the season. So looking at where teams rank, whatnot, is going to highly fluctuate from the game still. But 2 weeks in, went and took a look at the WCC rankings for a lot of the categories, and Santa Clara is not looking good in a lot of them. Opponents points per game, last. Opponents field goal percentage, last. 3-point percentage, last. Opponents 3-point percentage, last. Rebounds per game, 10th. Opponents rebounds per game, 10th. Assists, last. Blocks, last. They're 1-3. And all the metrics show that, yeah, that's kind of exactly where they belong at the moment. This has been a disastrous week and a half for Santa Clara. The North Dakota State loss, which they lost 88-80. They led by as much as 19 in this game, and the Bison forced overtime, and they dominated the overtime period. This is not a game that a tournament quality team should be losing at all. This is at the best case scenario is a quad 3 loss if North Dakota State plays really well the rest of the way. And at worst, it's a quad 4. This was a game at home with a near 20-point lead, and it slipped away. Well, also again, you let the Bison hit 15 threes. They took 24 free throws. 10 of them were in overtime. There are a lot of things you can point to of things that are not going well. They also don't pass the ball all that well either. Again, I mentioned assists. They're last in the conference in assists per game. They have yet to find a rhythm, definitely on the defensive end. But even offensively, it has gone long stretches of being stagnant, being kind of stale. And they need to figure a way out of this. So, can Santa Clara recover the hopes of an at-large push? My initial thought is no, they can't. This is, to me, this feels like it's over. After the last two outings, which have been embarrassing in different ways, it just feels like the sky has fallen already on this team. To me, this feels very similar to what happened to St. Mary's a year ago when they were 3-4. And everything seemed like it was falling apart. They lose to San Diego State in an unflattering fashion. They lose to Xavier even worse. They lose to Weber State. Like, they lose 3 straight games in a stretch that against teams, not saying that they were bad teams because they weren't, but definitely a couple of games that should have been won and they let slip away. And then it just seemed like it was starting to snowball a bit. Now, if I'm going to be hopeful, that same St. Mary's team still ended up in the NCAA tournament because they turned it around pretty quickly. But they also won the WCC, the regular season, and the tournament title. They also beat Gonzaga twice. They had a number of things that went their way a year ago for all of those things to happen. Do I think that Santa Clara could get back off the mat and do this? I mean, obviously, it can't be unilaterally say no, but it really feels like the chances of them being able to make a run to get back in the at-large consideration is such going to be a tough hill to climb, and the margin for error is next to zero at this stage. If you want to climb back into it, you better start winning the key games on your schedule. The Stanford game this Saturday, you look at some of the others that they have coming up, you better win those now, but you also better handle the business against the teams that you're supposed to beat, or at least the teams you should beat. And that starts with Riverside on Tuesday. That's a game that there is no excuse that Santa Clara should not be winning games like this by at least double digits, especially when they're hosting. They have the talent, and to an extent, this team was out of excuses of why they couldn't do it, why they couldn't break through. Because on paper, they have it all. But on the court, we have not seen those returns. Now, Santa Clara is going one direction. A team going the other direction, a team we talked about a lot about, USF, is been great the last few weeks, the last couple weeks since the season has started. And even since they beat Boise State just last weekend, they've upped the ante on that front and have picked up wins against Long Beach State and Chicago State, and they have won by a combined 75 points in those two games. They held Long Beach State to 54 points, and then they went out on Saturday and held Chicago State to 37 points. This was like a St. Mary's level defensive clinic in a way. They were just so connected defensively. They were all over the court. This is something, again, we started to see against Boise State, and it's carried over to Long Beach, carried over to Chicago State. This is a team that's starting to really put it all together. And so there was no hangover from that Boise game, which was always a little bit of a concern. They've risen up to 55 in KenPom, which is up a total of 30 spots since the season began. And They have a big one coming up this week, which is going to be another one of those potential feathers in the cap with Memphis coming in to play at Chase Center. They are also 3-0 at this stage as they're on their way to the Maui, but they'll make a pit stop in San Francisco to take on the Dons. And I'll preview that game later in the week, but this is a huge, huge opportunity for USF to get another win against a team that also has tournament aspirations, much like Boise State does. And they obviously got that win last week. And another note, Boise played another familiar opponent, at least that's going to end up facing USF in a couple weeks, Clemson, and Boise got the home win against the Tigers. So again, another familiar opponent, same in that stratosphere of like, okay, Boise played Clemson and they beat Clemson. Clemson will play USF in a couple weeks, obviously, like different matchups, whatnot. We'll see what that looks like as we get a little bit closer to those games in the Sunshine Slam. But things are starting to really point in a really good direction for USF, and things might be falling into place for a potential tournament run. We got the game 1 with Boise. Now game 2, Memphis, is that next test coming up later this week. Now, one of the guys on that squad, I want to talk about the freshman, and one of the big pieces that has been so much a part of their early success has been Tyrone Riley. And overall, the WCC has some actually really good freshmen and maybe some unexpected freshmen that have played really well early on. In the last couple of years, there definitely have been some really marquee freshmen who have come in and have played really well and whatnot. But this is maybe a more understated class as they entered, but their impact has not been understated. And Riley has been maybe the flashiest of them to this point. Obviously, we've seen him like super athletic kid, 6'6" wing. He had hit career high 28 just the other night against Chicago State. He's been averaging 19 and a half through the first 4 games. He's shooting 64% from the field, 52% from 3. And one of the notes as when we were talking with Coach Gerlifson last week was that he doesn't need the ball to be effective, that he takes instruction well, that he knows how to fit into the system of what USF needs. And this is something that we're seeing in practice, not just obviously like a coach saying, oh, he does X, Y, and Z. He's running the break well. He gets his hands in the passing lanes. He is finding his spot and not doing too much, which sometimes you are a little concerned about a freshman maybe trying to prove themselves a little bit more. This is a freshman who understands his role and has fit in seamlessly into what the Dons have been able to do to this point. I was even thinking about it because I know I picked Austin Rapp as my freshman of the year. I mean, I am seriously considering making that switch to be Tyrone Riley right now. But that's not to say that Austin Rapp has not also done well. The 6'10" forward up in Portland, he's averaged 12.5 points a game to this point, 7.3 rebounds. Now he's in a very different scenario than Riley because he's on a team that has to rely maybe a little bit more on him and has a lot of young pieces. They're just trying to get their footing. Obviously, they got a win over the weekend against Long Beach State, so a really good win for Portland on the road to kind of get that monkey off the back a little bit after a really embarrassing game against Santa Barbara, but then nearly missing a win at Oregon, really a game they should have had. Oregon was doing everything possible to try to throw that game away. But they were able to come back after that and get a road win, which I think does say a lot about just the young guys on this team and how they were able to kind of turn that around quickly and persevere on the road and getting that win at Long Beach. For Rapp, again, like different role. He's playing nearly 33 minutes a game, but he's shooting 45% from the field. He's shooting 48% from 3. He had 18 points and 4 rebounds in that win. He also had 9 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists in the overtime loss to Oregon. So we're seeing a lot of the different aspects of his game early on. And it's really exciting to see all these freshmen start to kind of like fill in quickly and have some early success in very different scenarios. Riley's is one scenario where he's fitting into a role that they need right now. Rapp is kind of maybe one of the future pieces of what that core is going to be, but he has to be something now for them to be successful as well. And now that Oregon team, just small note, they will be, even though they almost lost to Portland, they did come back, and I think they got a win over the weekend, won by 20, but they will be playing another WCC team, another undefeated WCC team later on in the week, Oregon State. And that will happen on Thursday. And that is another one of the games I'll preview later on in the week as the Beavers look to hold on to that undefeated streak and go 5-0, 5-0 going into the third week of the season. So a third freshman on my list. And this one really can't be understated, is Mikey Lewis. The St. Mary's guard has been about is everything they could have actually asked for, and probably has been a really big reason they've had the early success that they've had. Mikey Lewis, 6'3" guard. He's been coming off the bench the first 4 games to this point, but he has scored 10-plus points in each of those contests. He's only the second St. Mary's player ever to do that, and the other St. Mary's player to have done the 10-plus points in each of his first 4 games as a freshman is Matthew Dellavedova. So a lot to be said about who was the one who did this. In the game on Sunday against Nebraska, big win for St. Mary's. 23 points, 4 steals in that one. Clutch shots, some clutch free throws for the freshman as well. He's been averaging over 16 points a game. He's shooting 53% from the field, 52% from 3, and he's doing it in less than 20 minutes a game. He has been wildly efficient in the time that he's been in these contests, and we're starting to see just the different looks that he gives teams. I mean, he is instant offense when he comes in. We know that obviously in the first 2 games, team scouts, you're not really scouting for him yet, but I'm sure after the game on Sunday, that is going to change very quickly. So the rest of the team around him is going to have to make a larger impact. Mikey's going to probably have to pull back just a tiny bit, but he can score at all levels. He was scoring at the mid-range level, scoring at the rim. He's obviously a great 3-point shooter. Mikey is going to be a dude much like Riley. These 3 freshmen have been outstanding in the first 2 weeks of the season. Now, speaking of that St. Mary's game, I'm going to transition a little bit to kind of talk about what we've seen so far. They got a big win on Sunday against an undefeated Nebraska team, 77-74, at the Sanford Pentagon in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. That's where Santa Clara was earlier in the season, playing St. Louis. They led by as much as 14 in that first half. Nebraska battled back, even took a lead in the second, but St. Mary's pushed back and had a 10-point lead late in that contest. They had to play the last few minutes without 2 of their starters, Augustus Marshallonis and Luke Barrett, both fouled out in that game. A lot of fouls were called in this one, which is not to be unexpected because that's kind of what Nebraska has been able to do through the first 4 games of the season. Mentioned that Lewis had some really clutch buckets, some free throws to seal it at the end. The team, which had not shot well from 3 to this point in the season, went 11 for 23 from beyond the arc. The Mitchell Saxon was in full DPOY form in this one. 12 points, 12 rebounds, 2 blocks, 4 steals. There was one I remember, I think it was Bryce Williams, who came down into the lane, and he turned as Saxon was there, and Saxon just ripped it away from him for a steal. And it wasn't just the stats that show up. It was every little thing. He cut off lanes. He changed shots. He did so many little things that if you go and rewatch this game, and I encourage you to do so, it really was one of the best defensive performances I've seen from Mitchell Saxon for the totality of the game. He stayed out of foul trouble. He played, I think it was like 37, 38 minutes, something like that. This was the reason why he was the DPOY a year ago and why he's still my favorite to be DPOY this year. The defense looked much better in stretches of this game, largely probably because Saxon was available in the game, but also saw it from Mikey Lewis. Mikey Lewis was better defensively than we've seen him to this point in the season. Again, like that's a quick adjustment for a freshman to just make that in a few games. His hands were in passing lanes. He was causing a little bit more havoc than we've seen to this point. Paulus Morauskas, again, another really good performance. He had 16.6 rebounds. Looked at Luke Barrett, 15 points for him. Augustus Marshallonis, not as much in the scoring category, but he had also he played some really good defense in this contest as well. So this is a tough game for the Gaels to get on the road. Really did feel more like a road environment watching it on TV. The Nebraska crowd really did show up in South Dakota for that one. But they're now 4-0. Going into a week with 2 winnable games, Stanislaus State, Cal Poly. They'll probably come out of that 6-0. And then they will head down to Palm Desert for the Acrisure Invitational, where they will start with USC. And there's definitely been some talk about where St. Mary's was going to be coming into this season, because there was a lot of trepidation, a lot of uncertainty about what the Gaels were going to be without Joshua Jefferson and without Aidan Mahaney. You lose 2 high-quality starters from your rotation, and of course, it's going to hurt anybody. Now, after all the dust settled, I was repeatedly saying that they'll be just fine with the players that have replaced them, and it looks very much like that is exactly what has happened. Through 4 games, guess what? They're 4-0. Almost exactly where you would think St. Mary's would be with or without Mahaney and Jefferson. Now, if you go 1 for 1, a lot of people have been throwing out the immediate impact that Mikey Lewis has been having, and how that compares to, say, Aidan Mahaney's first season as well. Both impact freshmen who initially came off the bench and are score first guys. So definitely some similarities in that front. The way they go about it, different, but you can see at least like the line that people are trying to draw. Okay, let's look at it. So Aidan Mahaney, through his first 4 games as a freshman, so 2 seasons ago, he averaged 25 minutes a game in those first 4 contests. He was averaging 13.2 points. He shot 35% from the field, but he was shooting 50% from 3. So, again, most of those points, most of that effectiveness was coming from beyond the arc. That's not a small sample size. He was 13 for 26 in those 4 games. Now let's look at Lewis. And if you remember a little bit, I did mention some of those numbers, but again, here they are. He's been playing about 19 minutes a game, 16 points a game, 53% from the field, and 52% from 3. Lewis has been more effective. He has played fewer minutes. He has also been more effective inside the arc, not just beyond the arc. And I think early on, that's where we see that Lewis is maybe more of a polished scorer than Mahaney was at this stage of his career. And right now, that's all St. Mary's needs Lewis to be. They don't need him to be more than that. And I do think that if you look at the 2 rosters side by side, it's not like that. I think this St. Mary's team is deeper at the guard spot than that St. Mary's team was at that point. So it's not a straight comp, but you see just the effectiveness and the efficiency that Lewis has had is better than what Aidan Mahaney was his first 4 games. And that even includes a 25-point game that he had against Oral Roberts in the opener of that season. And the other one, looking at Joshua Jefferson. Now, this one is a little bit tougher because I have seasons to look at Joshua Jefferson. And I'm also not looking at a freshman with Morauskas. So how did I compare these two? Well, let me take Jefferson's best 5-game stretch statistically and compare that to what we have seen at least through the first 4 games here. And Jefferson's best 5-game stretch that I could find was a stretch during conference play a season ago, early in conference play, obviously, because he got hurt later on in the season. But in those 5 games, 13.8 points, 54% from the field, and 6.4 rebounds a game. Pretty good. Like, none of that is bad. Like, none of this, again, we're saying like these are quality starters that St. Mary's was trying to replace. In the first 4 games for Morauskas, first 4 games with St. Mary's in this system, 17.5 points, 11 rebounds, 50% from the field. There has been a significant there has been a big difference, I think, here on the rebounding front. Now, part of that was Saxon was a little bit was missed some time because he was in foul trouble, whatnot. So he stepped in and filled in that rebounding void. But at the same time, you could just see how Morauskas has really kind of like hit the ground running on that front and has been much more of an impact player on the offensive end than Jefferson was, even in his best 5-game stretch. Now, I will say this. I do think at this point, Jefferson is the far better defender than Morauskas was or is at this point. But you can see like the value is still there. They're still filling up the vacancy that they had, and they've done it very effectively. Missing Mahaney, missing Jefferson has not hurt St. Mary's, as they have replaced them not only with Mikey Lewis, but also Paulus Morauskas. And as I said in the offseason, St. Mary's will be just fine without those two. Now, one of the teams that also was impacted a lot by transfers in the offseason was LMU. And this was a team that had a lot of growing to do because there were so many new pieces going into this season. Much like everybody else. Let's not say, obviously, that anybody else was dealing with any less of it. But they did not play well against UC Irvine. They needed to gel fast. And this is a team that had some pretty high expectations of themselves. And they came into a game at St. Louis, a good St. Louis team as we saw against Santa Clara. And going into a tough environment against a team that, yes, was banged up. They did not have Robbie Avila available. But still a lot of really good players on the St. Louis team. So we knew that there was going to be a challenge. And yes, LMU did lose this game. They lost 77-71. But some of the things that I saw in here, I think there were some positives that came out of this. They were down 18 at one point, but they fought back in this contest. Like once they got down 18, once they got down double digits into 15, whatnot, I thought that contest was over. I was starting to ready to change the channel. Like this thing is done. But they grinded. They got back into this contest. The defense started to play better actually when they went to a smaller rotation, which was interesting to kind of see them work that in. And that was really all keyed on actually with some of the returners of this squad. Alex Merck-Veladze was a big part of that comeback. Will Johnston was a big part of that. He had 27 points. Aaron McBride was really good in this game. He played 24 minutes. And while the stat line isn't something that jumps out at you, I think there was massive impact in what he did in this game. He had 4 points, 5 rebounds, 5 blocks in this game for McBride. And you saw this comeback, this gelling was from the returners, the guys who were familiar with the system, got back into this contest and had it down to like a 2-3 possession game within the last 2 minutes of the game. So it's not like that they were completely out of it. They climbed back into this contest, which is, again, a good sign to see. Now, a lot of the newcomers, really, they didn't get a lot out of them. Javon Porter was 4 for 15 from the field. MJ Amy was 3 for 12. And what is I think what is tough about this team, this LMU squad, is that it is frustrating to see because they have the talent to be better. They have, at least they look like they should be able to do more with what they have to this point. And maybe there's some learning curve happening that you have to learn the new teammates, all of that. But almost similar to Santa Clara, it's that the expectation is not, the results are not meeting the expectation at this stage. And we're kind of waiting for LMU to break through, waiting for them to break through. But in many of the past few years, that's kind of, we have not yet seen it. The talent is there. And we all believe that they're capable. They just have not been able to pull through when they need to. And at the very least, they can get back on track this week. They have North Dakota on Friday. But they need to start building off of the successes they did have against St. Louis before they dig too deep of a hole before they get to conference play, because I could see this start to snowball before we ever get to January. Now, the other big game of the week was Washington State and Iowa. And this was, again, two teams who were undefeated going in. 3-0 versus 3-0. Now, Iowa won this 76-66. But this game was actually played out very similar than kind of the way I thought it would. It was high-paced, but the one thing that was different was a little bit lower scoring. I thought this would get into the 80s just based on how both teams had played. And Washington State did a lot of things really well. They won the paint battle. They were +5 in rebounds. They were +10 in points in the paint. But they didn't shoot it well. They were 5 for 28 from 3. They were sloppy they were sloppy many times throughout the ball game. They had 18 turnovers. Now, the only one who was really consistent on any front was Nate Calmise, because he could get anything as he went to the paint. He had 27 points, 12 for 22 from the field. He had no problem getting whatever he wanted. And, I mean, one of the other big things was that Iowa got Owen Freeman back for this game, and he had a big game, 21 points, 11 rebounds. So for Washington State, it just felt like this game was more about cleaning up the mistakes, cleaning up the things that you can control. 5 for 28, like for a team this capable, they're good enough shooters that 5 for 28 should not happen all that often. In fact, it was kind of almost surprising that it happened once. They're good enough to be better than this. I expect them to be better than this moving forward. The 18 turnovers, that's obviously something they're going to go back, they're going to work on. And Iowa put a lot of the pressure on them, which caused a lot of those turnovers. But also there was a lot of unforced errors in that 18 number. And in a game like this really was back and forth up until like the last minute of play, and free throws started to be the separator in this one. So you hear 10 points. It really was not 10 points. This was like a 2-3 possession game all the way through, almost until the end of the game. But something to work on. Washington State has to just clean up the turnovers, shoot a little bit better, and they should be just fine moving forward. But they do pick up their first loss of the season to that 4-0 Iowa team. And then Washington State, their next game is going to be, as I'm going to take a look at the schedule, they're Monday night against Northern Colorado, so they have a quick turnaround to be able to get back on track. Okay, so now the games that are happening this week. I'm only going to go over and preview Gonzaga and San Diego State, as that is the biggest one on Monday night. I will make one note of the other game that is happening on Monday, and that is Pacific at Arkansas. So that is obviously Pacific's first big road test. Obviously, I don't anticipate anything from the Tigers in this one outside of just don't get completely cratered. And I'm just going to take a quick look at what the over-under for that one was, because I'm pretty sure it's not going to be good. You have 24.5 for the Razorbacks. And if they can keep it right at about that number, honestly, that probably would be an accomplishment in this early stages of of this Tiger regime, of the Pacific Tiger regime. But 24.5 is a large number. But honestly, feels like that's actually not as large as I was anticipating it being. So that actually might be a good sign for Pacific. Okay, well, speaking of spreads, Gonzaga San Diego State. This one has lost a little bit of its luster only because San Diego State is in there. We know of one injury. We know that Reese Waters will be out for this contest, the 6'6" guard. Their the leading scorer from a year ago that was returning. That is a huge blow. And obviously they knew he is going to be out for at least another few weeks with a stress fracture to his right foot. The other potential injury is Miles Byrd. He is right now a game time decision. He also injured his foot in the game against UC San Diego this was in practice that he injured the ankle. Excuse me on that. He had 20 points, 8 rebounds in the one game he did play against UC San Diego. He did not play against Occidental on the 14th. So this could be a very, very different San Diego State team that Gonzaga will play if that doesn't happen. Oh, well, this is going to be a challenge no matter what for San Diego State without Reese Waters, potentially without Miles Byrd. Even with Miles Byrd and no Reese Waters, this was going to be a tough game for them. A lot of new pieces came in for San Diego State this year. They have no returning starters. They had 8 new players. They have 6 freshmen or sophomores that are in the rotation, and they kind of struggled against UC San Diego. They won 63-58, but obviously that's not running away or doing what we would normally think of San Diego State doing to a team like UC San Diego. A team that went to the Sweet 16 a year ago. A team that was picked fourth to be in the Mountain West by the coaches. They're an 11.5 point underdog at home, which just sounds wild to think about, that they're that much of an underdog at the Viejas Arena, because this is a team, this is a program, and that is a building that is defended so well and has always been defended well over the years. In fact, this is from Sean Paul at Field of 68. He sent out this note. The last time the Aztecs lost by 11 or more at home was in 2018-19, in that season, when they lost 73-61 to USD. That's right. The Toreros are the last team to go into Viejas Arena and win by 11 or more. That was the Isaiah Pinheiro team. So a pretty good San Diego squad that went in there and got a win, and an impressive win against their crosstown rival. So I find it hard to think that even if Miles Byrd plays, that this Gonzaga team is just, unfortunately, just not going to steamroll the Aztecs this time around. Avenge the loss that they took at the Kennel a year ago. Because they just got finished pummeling UMass Lowell on Friday night, 113-54. We've seen now 2 of these massive, massive blowouts from Gonzaga. Once against UMass Lowell, which is going to be a very good team in the America East, and against Baylor, who was a top 10 team when they played them on opening night. This Gonzaga squad is, I think, again, like, this is going to be hard to, again, match up when you think about it as we get further and further into the season, because this Gonzaga team is a mismatch for almost everybody. And against the San Diego State squad, I think that's going to be very much the case again. Without the 6'6" Waters, without the 6'8" Miles Byrd, that San Diego State team gets a lot smaller. And that's where Gonzaga can take advantage. That's where their shooting is going to become a factor. That's where their depth is going to become a factor. I wouldn't expect Gonzaga to really run much of anything very differently than what we've seen to this point. The one thing I will say that I think we might see a little bit more of is maybe actually seeing a little bit more of that, not more of, but different looks from the bench unit. I think we're going to see a little bit more, maybe what from kind of similar to what we saw against UMass Lowell, of seeing those different combinations of Dusty Stromer, Braden Huff, getting some of those other guys off of the bench and into the rotation a little bit sooner, because like this game, that game on Friday got out of hand so fast that we didn't need to see Graham Ike all that much. We didn't need to see Michael Ajayi all that much. We didn't need to see Caleb Battle all that much. There were a lot of guys that it was kind of like, well, we don't need them all to really be a huge part of this one. Ben Gregg, he was someone who got 20 minutes in that one. So like I think there's going to be some different rotations in this one as Mark Few starts to try to find different combinations that might work for different squads in the future. Because I get the feeling that with the injuries that San Diego State has, not to say that they're not going to be competitive, but I could see this one getting the 11.5, honestly, might be low. I think Gonzaga is going to cover it easily. If it would not surprise me if Gonzaga walks into that building and ends up winning by 20. I think we haven't seen the offensive, the scoring prowess of a Ryan Nembhard to this point. Not that we've really needed to, but we haven't seen it. Maybe we might see a little bit more of that in this one. We might see it a little bit more from Nolan Hickman. And I think that's the other challenge with this, not challenge, but this is one of the hard things about trying to match up with Gonzaga is that they have, and we've now seen it for 4 games or 3 games to this point, 8, 9 guys who could give you 20 points if they need it. So you never know where it's going to come from. You likely know where it's going to come from, but you can never be completely sure because this team has been loaded from the get-go. And while San Diego State is 2-0 to this point, they have not looked all that great, and they're shorthanded. And while being at home, being in that building is going to help, this is a Gonzaga squad that I think is laser focused at the moment and is going to look for that revenge in that building. So I see 11.5. I think it's over. I think it might be way over. But yeah, I would clearly take Gonzaga in this one. This is one of the big matchups, obviously, for them before they have one more contest, and then it's the battle for Atlantis Thanksgiving week, 1 week away. So we'll get into all of those a little bit later next week. So for the rest, schedule this week, we'll go over all the other games of the week that I have listed down. And for note that those other games are obviously Memphis against San Francisco at the Chase Center on Thursday, Oregon at Oregon State as well. And then I'll also talk about Stanford at Santa Clara, which is slated for Saturday. So those are the other 3 games I will review later in the week on a different episode of the podcast. All right, and that will do it for this episode. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, follow along on social media. Big week of basketball ahead of us. 1 more week before we get to Feast Week and all of the multi-team events, which is going to be a lot of basketball. I know I'm excited to basically get full near like wall-to-wall wake up basketball, go to sleep basketball. It'll be fun a week from now. But before that, some critical games. That Memphis San Francisco one on Thursday, I think is going to be really fun and honestly could end up being the one that San Francisco needs when you think about the grand scheme of things. All right, so one more time, that'll do it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.